We divide up our outdoor plants or perennials in order to benefit both the plants as well as ourselves. So I'd like to jump into why we do this division, also when is it best to divide up your plants, and lastly, how do we do it? So there are really three main reasons why we divide up our outdoor plants or perennials. The first one is because we want free plants. When our outdoor plants propagate babies and we get to divide them up and move those babies to different parts of our landscape or even give them away to our friends, that is the best. So I tend to have a lot of perennials that I can divide up that way because I love adding to my garden essentially for free. So that's number one. Number two, it's because the plant is overcrowded. If you notice that your perennial is not performing the way you want, maybe it's not blooming as much as you thought it should, or it is not growing in the way that you thought it should, it could potentially be because your plant is overcrowded. Dividing up to give that plant's root system more room is going to help it thrive. And lastly, the third reason to divide is for aesthetic reasons. And that could be because your plant or perennial has gotten too large for its space, or even because part of the plant may be dying while another part of the plant is thriving. So it could be important to divide that up to get rid of the part that is no longer serving its purpose and keep that thriving part. What time of year is best to do this? I don't think anyone would disagree that spring and fall are the two seasons in which you should divide up your plants. And the main reason for this is that the heat stress in the spring and in the fall is much, much less on a plant. So the heat stress is going to affect how the roots take hold. We definitely don't want to damage the source plant that we started with. And also we don't have to water as much at those time periods as we would if we tried to transplant something in the summer. And now I'd like to provide you with some examples as to how we divide up our outdoor plants or perennials. My first example is going to be starting with the golden sword yucca. The yucca is actually a plant that has a couple different kinds of roots. It has a combination of a rhizome, which is the hard kind of root under the ground that almost looks like ginger, if you will. And it also has some fibrous roots that come off of that. Well, the yucca ends up growing multiple plants on top of itself, and you can actually find the centers of each one of these rosettes, if you will, and being able to divide them up allows you to make multiple plants, take multiple plants away from your source plant. So in my case here, I have found a couple of quite mature rosette plants, if you will. And as I'm dividing them up, I'm trying to get as much root as possible. A piece of rhizome would be fabulous. And then you can see other fibrous roots coming off from that. And I will be able to transplant those to other places of my garden. As I look underneath the yucca plant, I'm clearing away some of the dead leaf strands. And so anything that turns brown, you can just pull off of the yucca. And then I'm finding other babies tucked underneath. So these little babies can also be removed and planted into fresh potting soil if I'm going to keep them in a pot, or go ahead and plant them right into the ground in other parts of my landscape. I've done this many times before with the yucca. So even though you may go to the garden center and find that the yucca costs a good $40 or possibly even more these days, you can potentially end up with several plants from your one initial investment. I think that's amazing. So canna lilies are another fabulous example as to a perennial that can be divided up. Now the cannas are really hardy to zone 9-ish, maybe even 8-ish. I am in zone 8A in Southeastern North Carolina, and I am right on the line of where canna lilies will be perennial. My ground here doesn't freeze, and that is a necessity for the canna lily. I could divide up some of these rhizome roots. So again, we're talking about the thick root that is underneath the ground, and plant my canna lilies in different places. Cannas are a great example of a plant that does not like to be overcrowded. Okay, so basically we said that I went ahead and divided up the yucca plant for two of my main reasons of division here. The first one is because the yucca was getting too big for its space, and secondly, I like free plants. The canna lilies used one of my other reasons, and that is the overcrowding. My canna lilies were overcrowded and they don't like that. My third and final example of dividing up some outdoor plants is for this oyster plant. Now this oyster plant really does not like to live outside in cold temperatures. So I know that it is not supposed to be hardy in my zone. This is a zone 9 to 11 hardiness plant, and it is tropical style, and the awesome purple foliage is just gorgeous. This is the first year I've had an oyster plant. I actually bought this second one here, and the second one didn't even look as good when I bought it as the first one had. At this point, I'm dividing up the one that doesn't look so good, and I'm putting it into smaller pots that can live inside for the winter. I may keep them and use them in my landscape next year. I may give them as gifts. I haven't decided yet. But the point is, I'm not sure that the oyster plant would survive outside for my winter, so I'm bringing it in to ensure its survival. I have done this already. I had an earlier video where I was decorating my front porch for fall, and I had this awesome fall planter, and I put 2 oyster plants in there, and as you can see, those plants are looking amazing. They are growing little babies off to the side, we like to call pups, and just doing super well. So I'm positive that these other plants in these small pots are also going to do great. Dividing up your perennials does take a bit of elbow grease, just like any other kind of garden maintenance does. But hey, I'm a big fan of being able to get additional plants out of my garden, especially for free. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it was helpful to you. Thanks so much for watching, and happy planting.